How do we handle those kind of cases?
No, I fully agree with you. This is a major problem that happens. How do we handle it in St. John's? Let me tell you. We do not have a separate HIV ward, HIV clinic or anything. They are just seen as any other patient. And all this, at least we used to have a program where we used to educate every junior doctor who comes in saying that HIV is confidentiality has to be maintained and things like that, and that tradition continues. So there is not discrimination that takes place. But when you have, like for example, you have a ART center with a big board, voluntary counseling testing center with a big board. The minute a person steps into that place, he may go to see his friend, but he will be branded as HIV positive. So in a way, the medical system itself sort of helps to spread the stigma. Okay, the next case that I have is antenatal mother. Okay, Saroja has been married for the past 9 months. She has problems adjusting with her in-laws. Her husband is very supportive. She is pregnant. During antenatal checkup, she is found to be HIV positive. Husband is also found to be positive. They decide to keep it a secret. Now the mother-in-law is very curious. She wants to know about the tablets that the daughter-in-law is taking, and she also wants to know if her daughter-in-law has a serious disease because she had some skin rash 3 months after the marriage. What will you do? See, what I am trying to bring out is it's not clear-cut black and white situations that you will face, and this is the major issue that we have when we deal with antenatal mothers. Okay. Now then next we have another one case is Ramappa, 64 years old with a history of loose stools for 2 months duration. Son-in-law says that the patient is HIV positive and requests you not to tell the patient. What will you do?
He has to be informed about it. But of course, following the NACO guidelines of this
64-year-old man, he's finished his life, he's a retirement.
How can he
play with grandparents, children?
We cannot make a value judgment.
I'm sorry, I'm also
this.
going to that level. I forgot about that.
We cannot pass a value judgment on the age of a person. This person, before we get him tested, he has to be given
counseling.
We have to be given counseling, pre-test counseling after doing the test. And
Madam, you're not a medical practitioner, no?
No, I'm not.
Okay, that's why you do not know. Most of the time, the testing is done without counseling.
But we can't do it. HIV testing cannot be done without pre-test and pre-test
Where is
counseling.
the rule? Where is the rule?
Yeah, it is a rule.
Where is the rule?
It's a.
Where is the rule? Show me.
It's
Informed consent is there. Okay, I'll come to that again. Okay, just keep this. Please park it somewhere. We'll come to that again and we'll talk about it. Okay. Okay. So when can this confidentiality broken? It can only be broken when there is a risk of infecting another person. Okay. And now we come to a question of autonomy, and here in autonomy we talk about consent, and here we always balance public health interests versus the freedom of the individual. Okay. It is not always that the freedom of individual is the most supreme thing. There are situations where public health is more important than the freedom of the individual. Okay. So it is not clear cut right this thing. Like for example, a needle stick injury. Okay, and you do not know the status of the patient, but here healthcare workers' life is in danger, and if you give prophylaxis for him or her, she will be protected from the infection. And here is one place where even if the patient refuses to get his HIV status tested, you will go ahead and test him, because your interest of the healthcare worker is more important than protecting the interest of the patient. Okay. Now, whenever we talk about this, the basic principle is treatment should produce an outcome that is beneficial to the society as well as to the individual. Sorry for that word. Okay. And here again the question of treatment or isolation comes in. And today nobody talks of isolating HIV infected persons because there is enough epidemiological evidence to show it does not work. Okay. Now, when we talk about consent is essential for testing. Okay. Now, can mandatory testing be done? No? Okay. Pardon? No. There are few this thing where we do mandatory testing, that is blood transfusion. Okay. Here again the public interest is more important than the individual. And remember, when blood transfusion, a unit of blood is tested, not the donor. Okay. In blood transfusion, even if you have a single tests positive, patient is discarded. Okay. Then the second thing that you have is foreigners. Anybody who stays in India for more than 6 months need to have an HIV test done. Is that rational? The reason why we do is tit for tat. Okay, when we go, we get tested. So when they come, we test them. Then the third thing that you have is pre-employment. Okay, I'll talk about, and the only place where pre-employment testing is done is in the army, and unfortunately that slide is little back. So I'll tell you why in the army you do a pre-employment testing, whereas in others you do not do pre-employment testing. Now when we talk about this thing, testing becomes an important part of consent. And now I'm going to talk about controversial topics. One is antenatal testing. Prevention of mother to child transmission is a medical possibility, and there is a very simple intervention which is very good for the child, bad for the mother. It costs only 56 rupees to apply that intervention. So there is a place and for doing mandatory antenatal testing. Okay. Because in the 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there was nothing you could offer if you detected a person as HIV positive pregnant woman. But today you have very simple methods that can be used. Drugs can be used. A single dose at the time of delivery and a single dose to the baby after 72 hours prevents the infection to less than 2%. Okay. So here there is a place for doing mandatory testing. And when this concept came about in obstetrics, when it became a mandatory form of testing, there is a whole, this happened somewhere around 95, 96, when 94 was the first time it came about, and 95, 96 was the time when in America they started testing mothers antenatally for HIV testing, okay, without the big thing that goes on. So from there came the concept of opt-out testing in pregnancy. Okay, normally, let me explain what I mean by this opt-out technique or opt-in technique. You see, the way you ask the question, I say, I am going to do a HIV test. Okay. If you give me permission, I will do the HIV test. This is one situation. Another situation is, I am going to do a HIV test. If you object to the test, I will not do the test. Okay. So the first one is known as opt-in, because you are making them inclusive. Opt-out is, you are telling them that you are going to do the test, and if you refuse, then I will not do the test. Okay. So in pregnancy, what we are supposed to have is an opt-out testing, where pregnant women are told that HIV test is being done. If you do not want, we will not do it. And almost 99% of the women will agree for HIV testing. Okay. And it also, this thing, it sort of, we'll talk about the last part where we talk about exceptionalism of HIV. This normalizes HIV as part of a disease that is there common in the thing. Here is the case. Rajshekhar is undergoing hernia operation. Surgeon orders a pre-op HIV test. He is afraid of getting infected and he routinely tests his patients before surgery. Is he justified? So you are worried that you will get an accidental injury while handling patients. Okay. Now I'll give you another case and you tell me what are the things that happens. Here is Dr. Shyam, passed his MCH exam and joined St. John's cardiothoracic unit, assisted in open heart surgery during the day. He accepted to monitor the patient post-operatively. Now, when you are young, you are enthusiastic to impress the boss so that he will get cutting chances. Okay. At 12 midnight, he received a call from the emergency department, and there was Mr. Y, who came with a midnight with a history of difficulty to swallow, pain in the chest for 2 months duration, fever on and off. Chest X-ray revealed widening of the mediastinum. CT scan showed there was collection as well as a foreign body in the mediastinum. Dr. Shyam was called. He posted the patient for immediate thoracotomy and exploration. Patient was taken up for surgery at 2 a.m. While exploring the mediastinum, he nicked the hand of the assistant. He also had a cut in his glove as well as 2 puncture marks. Can you identify the factors that led to this disaster? He is just learning. Yeah. So I told you on day 1 itself, you go through a learning curve. So he is probably from MCH newly come, so you may not have the skill. He is tired. He is not able to give his concentration or have his physical abilities. Anything else? Why should the assistant's hand should be cut? You have to retract. Okay, instead of using a retractor, you put your hands like this, bravely and stand. This happens. Pass the knife in a tray so that These are simple things that happen. Okay. Now, the other thing that happens is also, those of you who are medical, this thing, when you open the thorax, it's a dark area. So, visibility is poor. Because the visibility is poor, you are more likely to cut or make mistakes. Okay. When accidents are totally on the part of the surgeon, what do we achieve by testing the patient? Okay. This is the basis behind what we talk about testing before surgery. It doesn't make any sense. Okay. There is also another one thing which is known as window period, where the test is negative, patient is infected. That is very, very rare thing that can happen, and if the patient is in the window period, this again will be missed. Okay. So, these are the usual things that happen for accidents. So, testing the patient is not answer. Answer is to improve your skill. And if you go and tell any surgeon this, they'll shoot me. They say you're talking rubbish. Okay. Then recently, 2006, 2007, there has been change in the testing policy all over the world. Okay. And this is mainly because of what has happened. Here you can see the number of patients who are tested positive 1 year before they turn into AIDS. That means if you look at the history of AIDS, there is a asymptomatic period which may be anywhere between 5 to 10 years. Okay. And they become symptomatic, they develop AIDS. So, in the 5 to 10 years, this person has been spreading the infection. The last 1 year, they come to know they are HIV positive. Okay. So, in 1992, it was 51% of people were diagnosed as HIV positive 1 year before they developed AIDS, and in 2004, it is 39%. So, there has been a huge chance that there have been transmission taking place, and only when they land up, 87% of the infections are detected at the time of getting into a medical system. Okay. So, this puts to rest our concept of voluntary counseling, where people will come from communities, say I am at risk, so test my blood, I am HIV positive. And this is not only true in America, it is also true very much in Karnataka. This is statistics for Karnataka. 2.1 crore sexually active population in the state. Only about 1 lakh people accessed VCTCs in the last 3 years. Okay. 1.3 sexually active population in the state utilized the VCTC centers in the state. So, what is happening now is our testing centers are not serving the purpose for which we have started it. Okay. So, the government, instead of taking positive action, they just changed the name. Instead of voluntary counseling and testing test centers, they made it integrated testing centers, so that even the pregnant women who had antenatal clinic will attend these centers. That is not going to solve the problem that we have. So, now what even the WHO has recommended in 2000 is what is known as provider initiated testing, because most of the testing occurs in a hospital settings. Now they talk about that we actively advocate people to be tested for HIV. Okay. So, it also says that you have to have basic conditions of confidentiality, consent must be there, and you should have both this thing, informed consent has to be taken, and we need to have antiretroviral services also to be provided. So, you have to give minimum information that is provided, the clinical benefit and the prevention benefits of testing, right to refuse, follow-up services that will be offered. In the positive result, patient will be given post-test counseling. Okay. As it is, the testing is abused in medical settings, and if this becomes, it will become much more easy for doctors to go about doing these tests without even asking patients. That's my biggest worry.
But the question is, what reaches the larger people is the
larger people even today is hospital setting. You have to accept it. NGOs will
in the
protest.
rural and the
Yes, everywhere it is the hospital setting. NGOs will get upset because their bread and butter is gone. Okay, but this is a reality. 90% of the patients who come tested with us are tested because of a medical problem. Less than 1% people go because they feel that they are at risk for getting the infection. Okay, this is practical, and you can ask people who are working in the medical field. This is what happens in practice. Okay, now next thing that we talk about is justice. Justice is when there is a struggle for scarce resources, and when there is life is brief, is what we talk about then. It is unacceptable for anyone to suffer or die from lack of access to adequate or appropriate treatment and care. When you have no money, philosophy comes to play. Okay, and here also you must see the choice of words. Lack of access, adequate or appropriate treatment to care. It does not say that we will provide access, we will provide this thing. Okay, now this becomes a very important thing, is equitable access. Equitable access, that means the treatment that is available for other people also must be available for people with HIV and AIDS. And when you say treatment, it is not just the treatment of the drugs. You know, always people talk about drugs. It's the whole infrastructure that goes with it. You know, there is no point giving drugs to a starving patient. He requires nutrition more than drugs. So it's the whole gamut thing that comes about when we talk about equitable access. Now, NACO policy was in 2002. That policy has not been changed even after NACP 3 has come into effect. Okay, it is assumed that NACP 3 will reflect this policy, and policy will evolve from NACP 3. Okay, adequate equitable provision of healthcare to HIV infected people, improve services for the care of people living with AIDS in terms of services both in hospitals as well as home throughout the country healthcare system. And we talked no individual should undergo mandatory testing. This is the NACO policy. Government recognizes that without protection of human rights of people who are vulnerable and affected with HIV and AIDS, the response to HIV and AIDS epidemic will remain improper.